Hey! Last video, last one, then we're done. All right, this is the end of the Reconstruction period. This is the end of the semester. This is the end of 8th grade. I just, what a crazy year it's been. What a crazy time it's been. Man, you guys have really, in a lot of ways, this has been a challenge. Many of you have risen to the occasion. You've done a great job. Some of you smashed this one, knocked it out of the park. I'm very proud of the progress that a lot of you have made. It's been different. It's been weird. It's difficult to learn like this, but I appreciate your focus and your commitment to it. That all being said, here we are at the end of the year. This is not the way we wanted to end out. This is not the way that we planned. Nobody even signed my podium. Like, how sad is that? But I have loved teaching you guys. I have enjoyed every minute of it. You are a special group. You're a smart group with you're full of personality. You're full of character. I have loved working with you guys. I've loved teaching you guys. Thank you so much for allowing me and committing to the learning process with me. And I hate the way this is finished out. I miss you guys still. Love you guys always. And if you come back, when we all get back, when you bring your books back, when you bring all your stuff back, maybe even in August when we come back, or whenever we come back, make sure to stop by my classroom. Make sure you get a Sharpie and you sign my podium. I don't want to miss you guys' names on this board. So let's do that. Anyways, back to the task at hand. When we left off, we were talking about the amendments. We were talking about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that all secured black voting rights and black civil rights. These amendments, these rights were being slowly taken away from the African Americans during Reconstruction. It was like the Reconstruction Northerners were trying to ensure blacks the rights. The white Southerners who were taking back over control were trying to strip those rights away from them and trying to get back to what the word that we use was Latin word status quo, right? The way things always are, the way things always were the normal, right? The day-to-day normal. And that's what they were trying to get back to, that normal everyday way that it was before the Civil War. So radical Reconstruction. We talked about Lincoln's plan of Reconstruction being that he wanted to gradually, easily forgive the South, work them back into the Union, make it quick and painless. Radicals did not want that. So under presidential Reconstruction, Lincoln's Reconstruction that was carried out by Johnson, who everybody hated, that eventually goes away, and you're going to bring in radical Reconstruction. So Georgia and other southern states refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. They said, we are not going to do that. No. So what's the punishment for that? Well, the military occupation was going to be reinstated. The military was going to come back into Georgia, and they were going to rule over Georgia until Georgia could get its act together and put its government back in place, or put the government that the North wanted in place, and of course, ratify that 14th Amendment. There were certain categories of ex-Confederates who were no longer allowed to vote or serve in public office. So they went in and they said, okay, you guys that served in Confederate Congress, you guys that were major military generals or officers, you guys who were the president and vice president, all these people, you're not going to be allowed to vote anymore. You're not going to be allowed in government in any way because it's your fault for this whole thing in the first place, and you guys are the problem. We're trying to get you out and get new people in. So the South was divided into 5 military districts. They were not even looked at almost as states. Southern states must elect new delegates and write a new constitution. So they've already written one. They have to write a new one. And the South also had to ratify the 14th Amendment if they wanted to end military occupation and get back into the Union. So until you did those things, you were not getting into the Union. It didn't matter what you did. You were occupied territory. You were treated kind of as the enemy. Georgia was the last state to be reinstated into the Union, almost 10 years later, by the way. I mean, after the Civil War ends, almost 10 years go by before Georgia really gets its act together and is reinstated. 1868, Georgia ratifies the amendment and passes the new Constitution. Women now had the right to own property, and public schools were to be established for all children. I said 10 years. It's really 3 years, but 10 years in that, like, there's still all this chaos. There's still all this Reconstruction going on. There's still all these problems going on between Georgia and the federal government and all this kind of stuff. So, for those of you like, well, you said 10 years, it's only 3 years. So women had the right to own property. This is new for women at the time. Before that, they didn't really. I mean, if you're a widow, you could, but in a lot of ways, they didn't have any concrete rights. Also, public schools were being established. Now, we already talked about public schools had kind of had an interesting plight in Georgia because, like, there was very, very early on, there was this idea that we should have them, but nobody actually did it. There was no money for it, and a lot of people didn't care, right? They didn't want the government teaching their kids. Again, this comes up, and it's actually going to start moving towards that actually happening after this. Still have a lot of the same issues, though. Atlanta becomes the capital. So we've been talking about Milledgeville has been the capital up until this point. Milledgeville has been the capital of Georgia during the Civil War, during the antebellum period. Atlanta is a growing, large city. It's the center of where the railroad was. It's where a lot of people move into because they've lost everything else. They need jobs, they need opportunities, so they're going to move into this big, growing city. And of course, a lot of African Americans feel safer there because the military is headquartered there, and they are going to gather there. They're going to get with other freed African Americans there, and they're going to create their own community and their own, way of life and their own economy even. So Atlanta becomes the capital. 1867, African Americans voted for the first time in Georgia history as they were protected by the U.S. military. 169 new delegates were elected to the state government. 37 of them were black, and this is historic, and this is huge. It's very progressive at the time. If you look at 20 years later, it's unheard of that a black person would serve. The next black person would not serve in the U.S. Congress or in Georgia's government, really in any way, until the 1960s and 70s. So, actually, the 1970s. Black delegates were denied room and board in Milledgeville. They come to Milledgeville to serve in the state capitol, and the people of Milledgeville say, no, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to stay in this hotel room. No, you're not allowed to eat in this restaurant. No, you're not allowed to do this. And they are constantly accosted everywhere they go. And the guy who's in charge, the general, he says, the heck with this. I'm not doing this anymore. I think his name was Pope. He says, the heck with all this. If they're not going to get their act together, the state government can come to where I am, which he was headquartered in Atlanta, and he would protect them. So, General John Pope, I was right. General John Pope ordered the convention moved to Atlanta. And this is something that people in Atlanta had kind of been fighting for or vying for over the past, even before the Civil War. They had been pushing towards wanting to move the state capital to Atlanta. John Pope is all for it because that's where he is, because it's a bigger growing city. It's where the railroad is. And he says, come to Atlanta and I'll protect you. And that's how the state capital moves. Had the people of Milledgeville been more hospitable to the new black delegates, maybe the state capital would not have moved. Maybe that would have made Milledgeville a bigger city. Maybe that would have made Eatonton a bigger community as well. But I guess somewhere there's an alternate reality, an alternate timeline where that happened out there in the multiverse. But not in this one. Didn't happen. Atlanta's the capital now. Milledgeville is just some backwater town over there. Yeah. So, no hate towards Milledgeville. Calm down.
I'm from Milledgeville. Don't say that, Coach Ringer.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. At least you're not from Monticello. All right, so most black people became Republican voters. It was known as the Party of Lincoln. The Republican Party was known as the the Party of Lincoln. Black voters, in many ways, were associated with the Republican Party. 1868, Ulysses S. Grant, former general in the Union Army, hero of the Civil War, the guy who ended up winning it all for the Civil War, for the Union during the Civil War. He's elected the 18th president after Johnson. Republican Rufus Bullock becomes the governor of Georgia, and he's known as our carpetbagger governor. He was a very, very corrupt guy. He came down, he's a northern opportunist. He came down with the purpose of seeking opportunity, making money. He ends up becoming the governor. He's hated by Georgians. He's hated. Massive mustache as well. That's not something to hate. That's something to love. But you can hate people that look like walruses. 29 black representatives were elected to the state government, as well as 3 senators. Sorry, screen went dark. There were 29 black representatives, 3 senators. The majority of white members, one of the first orders of business that they do is that they get together and they vote to expel these black members from the government. They argued that blacks did not have the right to hold public office because that was not explicitly spelled out in any of the amendments. So they said, since it's not said that you can't, then we're going to, on those grounds, remove you. So they all outvoted them, and they voted to remove them from office. And, of course, this is one of the great injustices, one of the great embarrassing moments where we have so much progress going on towards, these people getting some rights and these people getting a say in government, and immediately this is taken away from these people. It's just awful. And they wouldn't have any of that representation in government, again, for another 100 years, which is just crazy. Here's Rufus Bullock looking like a walrus. Look at this giant mustache. He really does look like a walrus. That's just nuts. Look at him. Carpetbagger. That means a northerner that came down to the South, as the Southerners would say. Here is Ulysses S. Grant. He is a very beloved general, well remembered for his role in the Civil War. Probably less remembered for his presidency. Though he was not necessarily very corrupt, he had a lot of people that he put in office, a lot of people that he put in his cabinet and in positions of power that were very corrupt. So his presidency was kind of mired by that. He served 2 terms, though, 8 years. He's an interesting guy. Before the Civil War, he had retired from the military, saw really himself in his career as basically a failure, tried to go into business, failed at that as well, and he was a nobody. He was somebody who had kind of a life crisis, an existential crisis before the Civil War. Civil War breaks out, he rejoins the military, moves through the ranks, becomes the highest general, and then after that becomes president of the United States. It is a meteoric rise of a life. Very interesting guy. If you want to read about him, there's some really good stuff written about him, actually written by him. He wrote his own autobiographies and all that. Ulysses S. Grant. So let's talk about the end of Reconstruction. The end of Reconstruction comes because Congress was asked to intervene in helping end things like the KKK and the expulsion of black members of Congress. What we just said, when they kicked them all out, when the KKK is going around burning crosses and killing black people for voting and killing Northerners who were coming to help these black people to register to vote, help them how to read. They were intimidating, they were terrorizing, and things in the South were really just. It was like the Northerners just felt overwhelmed by the fact that they had tried and this constant uphill battle fighting against the Southerners to try and make them do right, make them do what they should do. So in 1869, Georgia placed under military control for the 3rd time. For the 3rd time, Georgia is placed under military control. General order by an army commander reinstated black members of the General Assembly. So they say, these guys right back in the play nicely, play fair. They're back. You can't just kick them out. 7 counties were placed under strict military occupation due to the Klan violence and due to terrorism. So there are 7 counties in Georgia that they had to bring in the military to try and stop them from this extremist behavior going on by the Klan and by the League of the South and by other groups. Putnam County was not one of those counties, so rest assured. Not that we were perfect, not that everything was peachy and wonderful here, but we weren't one of these counties. Federal troops left the state in July of 1870. Georgia was finally reinstated back into the Union again in 1870. So here we are, again, 5 years after the war has ended, and we're still, we had still been occupied territory. It's going to be another 5 years that things are kind of back and forth and still not fully the way they should be. The last state of the 11 ex-Confederate states to do so, we were the problem child of the states that rebelled during the Civil War. Jefferson Long, who was a former slave, was elected to Congress that same year. He was the first Georgia congressman, and he was the first black person to give a speech in Congress, in the House of Representatives. So he is from Georgia. He's buried in Macon, and a very, very famous guy because he is a huge historical, figure for our country in terms of African American rights, in terms of politics, including African Americans. He's brought in. He gives the first speech in a building that was actually built by slaves. So it's pretty amazing if you think about it. The White House, the Capitol, a lot of these monuments, memorials, and all these kind of stuff, a lot of them were built by slave labor. And to have a former slave speak in a building that was built by slaves, that speaks volumes to what at the heart of what this country really should be about. And at times we're not, and at times we seem hypocritical in the United States. At times we go against our better natures. But that's part of the interesting and beautiful thing about the United States is that it is this struggle, the United States between this union, and hopefully and ultimately the right thing will prevail, and the right thing does prevail. And in this moment, it does. But however, it's going to go right back down again. Many of these black members are going to be expelled again, and it's not going to get better for another 100 years. Once the military left, Governor Bullock was exposed for his corruption. He had tons of money. He was taking tax money. He was spending it on himself. He was embezzling it, giving to other people. And, everyone goes nuts. I mean, he's basically chased out of the state. He is forcefully removed from the state. So once the military leaves, Governor Bullock is exposed for this corruption. He recklessly spent and embezzled public money. He took public money, he took tax money, and he spent it on himself. He spent it however he wanted to. He racked up a huge debt for the state, which the state already had. So he's not helping. He racked up a huge debt. We already had a huge debt. He's not helping anything. Governor Bullock resigned over the threat of impeachment. We were going to get him out of there. He resigns instead. And many in the North are growing tired of dealing with all this. They hear things like this going on too. Northerners actually going on there. People that in the North they thought they could trust, finding out that there was corruption going on, that there was all this horrible, acts done against black people, done against freed blacks, done against Northerners who are trying to help these freed blacks. So they want quicker solutions to the nation's problems. They want this to be over. And many lost interest in helping the South. They just after a war, after 5 years of all this, after this ongoing problem, many in the North just were exhausted with it all. They just, at a certain point, they're burnt out. It's like they don't care anymore. It's like the uphill battle. Is it worth it? And that's how they felt. The answer is yes, it was worth it. But instead, the people, they gave up. They gave up on this at the wrong time. 1872, many ex-Confederates were given amnesty. They were given forgiveness. They said, you know what, you're forgiven for this. You're all eligible to hold public office again. You're eligible to vote again. And of course, it's just going to go right back to where it was. The Freedmen's Bureau is abolished in 1872. They get rid of it. So all that help that was coming to African Americans and all that help that was going towards them, it's gone now. It's evaporated. It's like they almost come out all right, job well done, even though the problem is still very much there. Only 4 black people were re-elected to the General Assembly after this. Georgia would be controlled by a majority white Democrats for the next 100 years. Another Republican would not be elected. Almost none would be elected. It might actually be none. I have to go back and check. But almost no Republicans, if not any Republicans, were elected until the 1970s. Think about that. It's crazy. Blacks would face many more years of discrimination and hardship until the civil rights era, the 1950s and 1960s, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. comes along, Rosa Parks comes along, Malcolm X, all these guys and girls that come along that start the civil rights movement, that change things up, that say, we're not going to take this anymore, we're not going to do this anymore, this is injustice, we're going to fight it. And that's what ends up bringing this all down, a wave of progress that comes in the 1950s and 60s. And thank God for it, 100 years of this Jim Crow era. And are we all the way through this? No, we're not all the way through this. Are there still remnants of this, the scars of all this that happened in U.S. history? Absolutely. We're living right now, in the wake of a murder of a young black man running through a neighborhood. All evidence points to the fact that he probably was doing nothing wrong, and yet he was murdered. Is there a connection to all this? Is this a connection to the scars and racism and the evils of the past that are still with us? Absolutely. All of this is not over. All of this is not done. And we've got to work towards ending that. It's unfortunate, it's unjust, and it's very sad, sickening that what went on that could have happened after the Civil War, that could have happened during Reconstruction, that could have done such great things for our country, that could have, the things that could have been, and yet it didn't. It went right back to basically the way it was, and it wouldn't change for another 100 years. And this picture of Alexander Stephens just gives it all. He's just like, golly, what do we do? What have we been doing? That's Alexander Stephens, Vice President of Confederacy. He became the governor of Georgia after the Civil War. He actually died pretty early on when he was governor. He's from Crawfordville, brilliant guy, but also not exactly the greatest historical figure. He gave a speech at the beginning of the Civil War called the Cornerstone Speech that said that the cornerstone of the South, the cornerstone of this new nation, of the Confederacy, was the simple fact, the truth, he said, that black people are unequal to white people, that they are the inferior race, and that they must be ruled over, and that they must be subjugated to slavery for the good of both themselves and of white people. And unfortunately, this is the mindset that many Southerners have, and that's going to, again, it's not going to change for a long, long time after this, and maybe still to this day for many people, for some people, hopefully, not many, and that's, again, hopefully for many. But that's the end of the Reconstruction, and I hate that we didn't get further this year. We should have. If we would have been in school, we would have gotten much further than this. We would have gotten all the way into the New South. We would have gotten all the way into all that, all the way into probably up to World War II. But the nature of this quarantine has really slowed us down and been weird, and I hate it. And but it is what it is. So, anyways, if you've gotten to this point in the video, if you're still watching, which you are, thank you, because nobody else does. But here's your password. Your password, or your extra credit, rather. Your extra credit word is fantastic. So email me fantastic. You guys have been fantastic this year. You're fantastic for watching this, for paying attention, for listening to me talk for this long. Thank you. Love you guys. I miss you. I hate that we didn't end up the way that we wanted to. But swing by my office whenever you can, whenever you want to. Stop by if you're in the neighborhood. Come over, say hi, and maybe I'll give you a donut or something. See you later.